I get to start because I have things to say. So, so there's a couple of themes that really struck me from the papers and talks that I was listening to today. The first thing that I really liked is that a lot of the speakers were using the library as a metaphor, and by talking about it as an artistic metaphor, it prompted me to think more about the library, like what are we trying to preserve? There's a theme of catastrophe involved in the Anthropocene thinking. And so there's always been kind of an assumption that there are sacrifice zones on the earth that we can just sacrifice to our lifestyle and to energy production and such. And what the Anthropocene suggests is that the entire world becomes a sacrifice zone. So when we were looking at the idea of the obliviation, the obliviation studio, with the landscapes that have disappeared. And what everybody is doing is looking at the landscapes where they live and the places they live and seeing those things as threatened with oblivion. It's not just certain places anymore, it's like every place. So as librarians, we have been given the task of trying to preserve something in the face of that, and also the task of helping people get through it. So that's a big job.
Well, I guess that's actually a good segue to something that surfaced for me a couple times today. And I wrote down, for lack of a more imaginative term, digital choices. So there were several reminders from Sarah Dem, from Jodi, about the fragility of digital information, but then we're reminded of the richness and diversity of content that we might lose access to without our digital libraries. From Heather, from Andrea, talking about how important that is for Russian libraries. I guess when I think about this weekend, I've thought a lot about how the conversations have been speculative and provocative in really good ways, but I'm also sort of interested in how we translate some of these provocations into action, intentional, coordinated across our institutions, or even just like local action where we are. I guess one example that I keep coming back to, and maybe this is because what I brought to the conference with my talk yesterday, is collection development. It seems to me there's tensions between focusing collection development on local, which is something that Amy talked about today, versus national, which I thought is something I heard a lot of in Sarah, talking about federal data. Tensions between co-locating materials in shared repositories versus resilience through distribution or proximate locations, as it were. And there were also several reminders about power dynamics implicit in collection development decision-making. So some of these things can possibly not be within our control, but things like labor issues, resource issues, database subscription models. So those are some of the things I've been thinking about.
A couple of things. I really liked, I liked all the presentations, but the two that were really neat because they kind of sort of undid what we think of library work and archives work was Paulina and Charlie, both talking kind of about like basically just let's go outside. Lots of sort of turning the idea of, Charlie's was really sort of inventive in a lot of ways, and thinking about just really questioning the notion of what a library or an archives is. And I think I've seen that as like a theme almost across the whole 2 days, is like trying to revisit and sort of say, what is it that we do? What's the what's the reason to be for archivists and librarians? With Charlie's things on a more basic level, I thought of the, I don't know if he's heard of this, but the Center for Landscape Interpretation. I don't know if you've ever seen their website. Yeah. They do some neat stuff. They've been around, since almost 2000. So thinking about, too much information, I kind of got that from Paulina when she was talking about the Chinese library, that really a place of solace and meditation, which is neat. Libraries are meditative, but not in that way, I don't think of it. And that got me thinking, and sort of hooked it onto something I've been thinking about for a while. I know I'm Mr. Peak here. I've been talking about peaks, but a new one I read about, which was really interesting. I don't know if it came out with like the Trump. No, not yet. Peak me. I'm gonna be out of here in a second. But peak attention, and basically they say like the intention, basically everyone being on the same page, so to speak, happened around 1970 or so. And so you think about that bifurcation of interest and information, and you think about the tasks that librarians are set to do and archivists, and this notion of like, what do we value? Where are our values in terms of our collections? And thinking about the National Archivist saying that we can perhaps preserve everything. I mean, that's a stark contrast from like the theme of this conference. And if we're not going to save everything, then what do we deaccession, or what do we throw out? And those are all issues of values. That's what it comes down to, is what do you value as a society? And anyways, I'll just leave it at that for now.
Okay, so I thought of some things to say. Thanks, guys. I'm a public librarian, and are there any other, I know there's Evie, and I know that Fred did his presentation on public libraries, but are there any other public librarians here? Right, yeah. Jen, right? Yeah, a BPL, but an archivist. An educator, outreach, that's right. So something I noticed that I just take for granted about librarians, I don't know much about archives other than what I learned in library school, like a few classes. So I learned a lot today especially about what we choose to, what you just said, Mark, about what we value and what are people in 100 years going to value, and the danger is it might be different in 100 years, right? And the things that we maybe deaccession might have been the things that they need or they want. But I think there's like a real difference, it seems like, in the way that the work of a librarian and the work of an archivist. Certainly there's a collection development overlap, but to me, I see the librarian as an actor or an agent. So like when I was thinking of my presentation for this, Wendy was telling me it's just so practical. It's so, but that's like my whole work at Brooklyn Public Library is just doing programs with people and a lot of teaching and a lot of like hands-on, how do you do this, and teaching kids how to do things. And so that's what I see a librarian as, and that's what the ALA is really, into now, Libraries Transform. And I think that was reflected in Evie's lightning talks as well, versus the archivist, which is, I always picture like in a dark room somewhere, like scrolling through files, collecting things. So thank you for it was nice to be around all these archivists.
So one of the things I heard a lot of people talking about is that it feels like a relief to be in a room with people who are thinking about the same things. And what that implies is that when we go to library conferences, usually people are not thinking about these things. They're telling a different story about the future of libraries than this story. So one of the things I'd like to take away from this conference is to get this story to be a little more prominent, because I think we all believe it, we're invested in it. We see a transformation of libraries that's quite different from the story that's getting told about all digital libraries, about libraries should go away, about they're not necessary anymore, the paperless library and so forth. So anyway, I don't, maybe some of you have some ideas about that.
Yes.
Jodi has an idea.
Why does it sound like, I'll put this on Rory's shoulder, because there's no Rory among this. I think that there should be some sort of a news item in the library journal in the next couple of months that says this took place, and reiterating that exact same thing, that we came with everybody really focusing on one particular thread, but we had so many different colors of thread in the fabric that we put together here. Different approaches, different ideas. It was idea and resource sharing that came across, all sorts of different patterns that we have. And this is the kind of a message that I think people who read the library journal know that small events like this, one, happen, and they really, really matter.
Yeah,
And I think that
that's a
if
good idea.
Thank you. Okay, I'd highly suggest it.
Rory's on it.
Thank you, Rory. Sorry for
some-
dumping it on your shoulders.
Something I just thought of that I, for some reason, just came back to me when I was in library school, about libraries being and maybe this is true for art too, not being a requirement of democracy, but a symptom of democracy and a symptom of civilization. So if civilization falls apart, or if, as Roy Scranton writes in his book, it would seem that so too would libraries, right? So I don't even know where I was going with that, but I think about that a lot. Like, a friend of mine does peace work in Yemen, and she's a psychologist, and she goes there with teams, and they try to, work on resolutions and peace resolutions and factioning people and all that. And she said it just really hit her. I mean, she knew this theoretically, but she didn't really get it, that people cannot even fathom peace or getting along or sharing when they're starving. So some of these issues, I have to confess, like, I'm not sure that in terms of what to preserve and what not to preserve, I think that, well, this is my presentation again, but the basics about how to feed ourselves is probably where we should start. And I don't, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just babbling.
No, I want to respond to what you're saying.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, because I want to say, that was a compliment, and I know, when I said it was so pragmatic, because it's like, that's needed, but I want to say that the reason it's needed in such, the reason it's so much in demand is because our social safety net has been dismantled. I mean, this has systematically been happening. Why we are, why you find homeless populations in the libraries, because the dismantling of the net. And I think we need to complain about that. So I want to say that while I honor what we do, I want librarians and archivists to complain more, right? I mean, really, it's not okay that our social safety net has been dismantled, right? That's why, one of the reasons why it's so crucial what we're doing, so.
So Jodi, right? I'm totally fascinated by your premise about libraries being a place that teach survival skills, because I try to restrain myself from becoming like a nice progressive prepper, because I feel like I'm occasionally on the verge of becoming that. But I grew up. How many people here grew up knowing what the Foxfire books were? Anyone else? Okay, awesome. I don't have to. Well, anyone not know what that is? Okay, Foxfire was a project started by an English teacher in Appalachia. And he basically had his high school students go and interview their grandparents, their aunties, like whoever, and and they wrote basically a zine that became really famous. It's been reprinted into like a dozen books about like how to do things like butcher a hog or make moonshine or make a quilt or like all these crazy things. And so I just kept thinking of Foxfire when you were talking about that. And I think there's a needle to thread there between this idea of, and all of that is very local knowledge, right? So like, not everyone everywhere in the world needs to know how to butcher a pig, but they might need to know how to butcher the protein that is most prevalent in their area. And this gets back to me to some of the things that the anti-resilience talk and how the loss of local knowledge, right? And so if we're all bouncing around to different jobs, we don't have the capacity to create that ability to teach people we know local knowledge. And so that's sort of, in my own personal life, that's where I'm spending a lot of time in my head, is like, how can I develop connections in my own community to create forms of local knowledge and share it with people?
Yeah, that's that's a really interesting point, jumping around job to job and flying everywhere, and the mobility that we have, I think, since car culture. I think we started getting that mobility away from extended families and all that. There's actually a program at Green Mountain College, and the basic, and Bill McKibben was their original professor in residence or scholar in residence. And their whole premise is when you're in this program, it's a distance program, and wherever you are, you study that, you do a deep ecological history of that region. And you do have to do a project in your region. So that's one of that's how you graduate, is you know where you live. And you start working with the people where you live on how to live within the means of what you have around you, and also how you think it's going to change. So I think that's just an interesting, that notion is out there, and schools are teaching it.
Is there another question? No. So I was going to say, I appreciate the comment about sharing this, but there's always a danger with things like this, that they're one-offs and we all go back to our lives and forget. I'm just wondering, like, what happens now? And Rory has an answer.
Rory has his hand up.
Let me just quickly say, and then I'll give you the mic. Keep thinking about where you might blog about this, because Amy has already offered to blog for the Sustain RT blog. And we can all go back to our corners and keep writing about it.
I don't want to be specific about what we're going to do, because we don't know what we're going to do exactly, but we are kicking around ideas, and we're definitely going to try to keep this going. The one thing that I'll do is make sure everybody gets a reminder of how to subscribe to the listserv, so we can use that to continue a discussion. We also originally planned to do a follow-up blog, and we haven't talked about that throughout the weekend, but we'll talk about that again. That's a possibility. People have asked about proceedings. I don't know whether we'll do that or not. I didn't collect papers from people who prepared papers, but they are going to go into the archive at UMass Amherst. So that collection will be there, and it will be available online. So that's sort of what the proceedings are. In addition to that, I hope to do something that's a call for papers, either for an edited book, or, well, I hope to find people from among our presenters who want to serve as editors for either an edited book or a special issue of our journal, the Journal of Critical Library and Information Studies. I can't speak for that journal because we have a managing editor and we have another associate editor, and so but I want to mention that I'm going to propose that to them. So those are the ideas that I have kicking around, and I welcome other ideas in addition.
I wanted to just make also a comment in relationship to the problem of locality and what libraries have done. And the cliche of Alexandria is always interesting, right? The fact that the library per se didn't die of the fire, but of lack of maintenance, and which was a longer process. And how libraries and archives, we tend to talk about them as processes of keeping or storing or preserving knowledge, whereas the opposite usually happens, right? They maintain themselves important because of the way in which they translate the relevance of that which is preserved. So the constant act of translation forward, rather than the preserving back, is actually what maintains them, what makes them what they are, so what makes archives. So I'm also wondering, when we're now having this conversation about the fact that we're jumping too much across cultures, and then we need to emphasize what the local is, I'm also wondering if we don't need to make an update of what that means, understanding how the idea of a node, which has a more complex notion of locality, how that enters the conversation in the problem of this process, which is the library or the archive, which is, again, understands the idea of local as well in a very different way. So.
Yeah, I don't have a mic.
Amy talked about her.
So that's the reason why I like the environmental humanities model is because what I see is that that's where the scholarship is being done, discussing the meaning of place and how you define place. It's actually really hard to define place because of the issue that people can move around, and the transition between ecosystems is not a hard and fast line on the ground. It's not, you can draw a line around a county or around a country and make a border wall, but that's not a real thing. Birds can fly across it and such. So the whole issue of what makes a place is actually way complicated. But once you become a librarian in a place, so in academe, the university is often detached from the place where it exists, and we tend to talk about that in terms of town and gown, right? You hear that all the time, and what that means is those people over there at the university don't actually live here. They're just at the university, and then there's the townies who really come from here. So so we all know that that's a problem, but we don't actually address it in our collections very well. What we do is we make a special collection that collects archival stuff, but we don't make a collection like the Interference Archive that people can go and get their hands in and learn about the place where they are. So a story, way back when I was working at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, the Fort Lewis College has free tuition for Native American students. So they had about 10% of the students from Native American tribes. Well, the materials about Native American people were in a special collection locked archive that was open, reduced hours. You couldn't check the materials out. You had to go upstairs and beg the people to get it off the shelf. So the Navajo students would come in and they'd say, I want to learn about what's going on with the tribal government, and it's all locked up there. So here are people who want to study their local situation. And there's not stuff for them because it's our special collection. So I see a real need to not have the special collections be so special, but to have them be the core of the working collection.
So a few months ago, I went to this symposium in DC. It was sponsored by the NEH, and it was on digital humanities and archives. And the day featured opportunities for us to break out into small groups and talk about how archivists and libraries and librarians and digital humanities scholars can collaborate. And someone during the course of the day talked about this collaboration continuum. And I just was thinking about that, how there's 5 stages of collaboration. I think OCLC did a report on it, but it starts out with contact, then cooperation, and then as you are further integrating yourselves with your collaborators, then you really get to collaboration, and then beyond that is convergence. And we brought together here librarians and archivists to talk about the issues that we're facing with the Anthropocene. But if we were to do something like this in the future, I'd really be interested in seeing people in other knowledge professions come together to talk about this, because we're all, our work is at stake now with the administration and with the coming effects that we're going to see with climate change. And I think instead of just making contact with the scientists and humanists and educators, technologists, librarians, archivists, we need to move beyond just contact and cooperation, beyond collaboration to convergence, because that's when you really see the shared values and trust, and more and more we're going to need each other to do this work.
Your phone call on Tuesday with NASA.
I just wanted to make a comment in response, Amy, to your thought about making special collections available as a tool for the community. Kind of a really interesting story from Interference Archive. There was this man who was a community organizer in the region he lived in, which will remain unnamed for this story, in the US. And he traveled a lot to Cuba in the 70s and collected a lot of posters from this amazing graphic design collective that's based in Cuba, OSPAL, the Organization of Solidarity with the People of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Anyway, he passed away several years ago and left this incredible collection of resources, and his family was trying to decide what institution to give those to, and they were deciding between Interference Archive and a local higher education institution. And they finally decided to go with their local higher education institution because they really wanted this material to be in that place as a tool for the community to use and have access to. But they wrote a very specific agreement with that institution saying, we're giving this to you on the condition that it be accessible to anyone who comes to look at it, because it's being given to you as a tool for the community to use. These posters, like, they're just gorgeous. They're created in solidarity with liberation movements around the world in the 70s. And that access requirement wasn't met. And so the provisions in that agreement allowed them to then take it back, and they gave it to Interference Archive. Even though that wasn't in the community that they wanted to have access to it, they said, listen, like, access is so important to us. And so, I mean, we got that collection of posters and we were just blown away by them, and we were like, well, what makes it more accessible than putting it on the walls? So we did an exhibition, and it was just incredible. But, like, people really want that, and if you can do anything in your special collections to give that kind of access, it's huge. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I also think that, we've talked a little bit about public space, and, I teach at CUNY, and I've been teaching this interdisciplinary place-based course with an architect, and I bring my students to, like, archives and museums and collections around the city, depending on what place we're studying. And last semester I was teaching with an architect, and he wanted the students to go independently to the Brooklyn Historical Society, which is in historic district Brooklyn Heights, and they were just supposed to take some photos for a sketching project they were going to do. And leading up to it, I tried to have a conversation with the students after they had visited the archive about their impressions of the space and, how they felt in the space, because we're talking a lot about space. And all of them were like, oh, we felt super uncomfortable going there by ourselves, even though it's a space that's free for them because they're CUNY students and it's a public space. And we talked about, I was like, why? And they were like, well, it just felt like it wasn't a space that it was made for me. And so we talked about how barriers to entry are not always like a literal barrier. Like, they could all just roll up in there with their CUNY ID and be like, hey, I want to take some pictures of the ceiling, but they felt uncomfortable doing that. I mean, in part because of the architecture of the building, but part of it is about, like, archives literacy. Like, they don't, and I do like a intro to archives before we go into any archive space of, like, how there's, like, special rules for using this space. But, I don't know a way around that other than to have a conversation about it and who does this space seem like it's created for. And we actually, when they were sketching their redesigns of the space, because part of what the architect wanted them to do is there's a blank ceiling in this otherwise really ornate space, like a drop ceiling, and he wanted them to reimagine the ceiling. So instead, I just had them sketch and reimagine what would make the space into a space that they wouldn't feel weird going inside of. And I don't know, like, that's not really a question, but it's something that, I think we don't think about enough in terms of what it means to make our spaces accessible, like what that means to someone who might not be familiar with sort of institutional processes.
Do you have any of those?
I don't have. We didn't digitize those. I might have. I don't know if anybody put them. We have the students do, like, a bunch of site reports. So, like, some of them put their sketches in there, but most of them feel weird about they're like our sketches are bad, like, because they're not architecture students. So they mostly just put in photos. But it was, the conversation to me was really interesting. We ended up, the class was about, that section was about actually Grand Central. We were studying Grand Central. And especially we were looking at sort of the waiting room, and because it used to be a really, like, ornate space that, like, rich people would go to until everyone started driving cars, and then in the 80s, this, like, fancy Vanderbilt waiting room, they had to take all the benches out because all these homeless people were living there. And so we ended up talking a lot through the course of the semester about the subversive use of space and, like, subversion of public spaces or using spaces for reasons other than they were intended for. So it would kind of fit in with that whole thing.
I mean, we could get into a long conversation about the accessibility of special collections, which is probably for another venue, but I think as you're talking, it's a good reminder that, like, if some of the, I guess, less pleasant futures are what we are in store for, then there is that, you know, I guess, danger that we could, like, close down these archives, you know, to protect them even more, and that would be exactly the opposite of what, you know, or libraries, you know, exactly the opposite of what it seems like we're all sort of suggesting they need to be as the future unfolds. So it's a good reminder.
Although that is, of course, this is coming from the children's librarian. Isn't that how some of our information has survived, ironically, right? I mean, I'm thinking of the Gnostic Gospels. I mean, they were hidden away, and they were so subversive. And I mean, really, the only reason they survived is because someone went and hid them, and nobody had access to them, and then they were uncovered, right?
Well,
I mean, I'm not advocating for that.
On the other hand, we could encourage like rapid or rampant duplication of all of our collections to spread them around as widely as possible too.
Something else I wanted to mention, I forget who said it. Oh, it was the Hathi Trust. She left. I forget her name, but Heather. Yeah, I really like, for some reason it makes me think of something she said about having an exit strategy. Like, oh my God, like there is a missile headed this way and we're gonna lose everything. So having like a plan where everybody, having like you're designated to print out this one article, and like hide it somewhere in your town, which is like, 12 hours away from the place that's about to get hit or something. I mean, I don't think that's probably not the first thing Heather would think of, like, oh my God, I have to save Hathi Trust, but something like that, we're spreading it out. Yeah, that's interesting.
One thing about the long-term preservation of literature, the Gnostic Gospels might have made it through by sheer luck, but there are tons of other things that were widely reproduced and never made it through.
History is what doesn't get thrown away, basically. When I was at the University of Hawaii in the Archives and Manuscripts Department, everybody was assigned, at the time we were using CDs, gold CDs, and we had pre-selected what were our most important materials in each collection, and we had them like a copy on a gold CD stashed in a certain spot, so everybody would grab their quantity of gold CDs whenever we do fire drills, because it was an emergency operation, and and that's what we did. So I can see doing that with printouts. Just have your printouts of your most important documents, just in case. It's a mindset. Even if you don't get everything you want in real life in a real drill, it still gets people thinking.
Yeah,
along
I
those
like the word
lines.
printouts. Like, save my hard drive, but then like you can't find anything to hook it up to, so it's like you can't read anything on it. Printouts. That's good.
Sorry. Back to the Future. Still recovering from it.
Really? Did you guys save the CDs though? Okay. Oh, it was. Oh, forget about this. Just kidding.
They lost all their maps, a lot of maps from the 19th century.
I don't have a question, guys. Sorry.
Oh, you don't have a question?
I'm just
Okay,
holding the mic. Does anyone else?
I just wanted to comment that it doesn't have to be the end of the world or the end of electricity to prompt us to develop a low-cost, common-sense kind of plan. I really liked your story about in Hawaii, and when I haven't been really involved in this world for very long or thinking about this for very long, but our presentation about potential flooding and whatnot of archives begs the question, so what? So what should you do? And just kind of in my head, my own little ramblings to myself comes up with something very, very similar to that. It shouldn't cost any money. It will take a little bit of staff time, but just identify what would you most like to save if you had 24-hour noticed prior to a storm surge event, what would you most like to save, and what would you do with it? Where would you, I mean, maybe you just carry it up 2 flights of steps or something. I mean, maybe that's all it takes to prevent losing your most treasured resources.
Well, to follow up on when I said yesterday, I said that sometimes I said preparedness means you're going to do it beforehand. Why don't you put your most valuable stuff in the most accessible place where you can get it out as quickly as you possibly can? That's your preparedness drill. And so you just take the things that you say, well, this is the most valuable stuff I've got. It's going to be right next to the door, or close to someplace where we can have a really fast access. So it's like I said, planning ahead.
This is a really interesting conversation about accessibility as a public librarian at Brooklyn Public Library, because I feel like we are so accessible that half of our collection walks out the door every day and we never see it again. We have people sleeping in the building, a constant subversion of space, and it's just so rampant. We don't even really try to. We consider a lot of our collection to be gifts. That being said, I really wish we could get more public librarians and public libraries in these kinds of discussions, and I'm not sure why they aren't. I know that academic librarians are pushed more to do things like this and think about things and publish and write, but I'm not sure why there aren't more public librarians represented in this discussion. Or maybe there are, but I don't know.
No, but when we're planning ahead, it's like
reach out more to.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that, but I did want to just kind of go back to that question a little bit previously, and also put in a shout for the potential that perhaps in some cases use is preservation in a way. I mean, maybe the more you use it, the less it matters that you have even a copy in the first place, and that might be a longer lasting type of preservation than the physical copy or the digital copy or whatever. Those kinds of things just seem like important things to think about moving forward.
I know that I overheard something about subsequent meetings like this taking place online, and I just wanted to let you all know that out of ASLI, which is I know there are two, so I'll tell you the Association for Study of Literature and the Environment, has sort of like a splinter group known as the Eco-Media Group, and they're thinking of doing basically an online conference out of UCSB, I believe, next year. So I will share the information about that, and maybe we can have more of us participating there and thereby help kind of build.
Yeah, there's also another conference called, this is kind of Casey's idea, but the inverse, right? That we get involved in other kinds of conferences. The ITRC conference that happened in DC last year, International Transformational Resilience Coalition. It was hosted in DC by the American Psychological Association, and I was the only librarian there that I knew of. There was a lot of psychologists, but there were people from all different fields. There was somebody there from Homeland Security, and the whole conference was dealing with resilient emotional and psychological resilience, and a high correlation between areas of the world where resources become scarce and people start killing each other, and rape and everything just shoots up, and how can we prevent that from happening here? So that conference happens, I believe, it's going to happen again every November, but on the West Coast, right? So that's another possibility. Cool to go to, because I think people don't make that connection, like oh, you're a librarian, and then they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, you're a librarian, like this, yeah, okay, I get it. And plug for ALA Sustainability Roundtable. Amy is the incoming coordinator. I'm going to be the coordinator. She's the coordinator-elect. And Madeline is the outgoing coordinator. So if you're a member of ALA, it's only $10 to join. And that's another way to continue this discussion as well.
Wow, this has been so amazing.
Are we done?